Hello and welcome to Lesson 3 of our Introduction to the SuiteCloud Development Framework here on SuiteHub. In the previous lesson, we discussed the core concepts of SDF, we established the terminology that we need to understand, and we created a brand new SDF project. In this lesson, we start learning what we can do with that project using SDF operations. We'll explore the major lifecycle of an SDF project. We'll look at SDF's commands for facilitating that lifecycle. We will add new components to our project, make changes to them, and then deploy those changes to our account using SDF. As with most software processes or applications, an SDF project has a fairly routine lifecycle. Initially, we create the project, then we set it up with access to its appropriate NetSuite accounts, and we typically only do those once per project. Thereafter, the project settles into its ongoing lifecycle. We'll periodically add objects to it, we'll add files to it, we'll change code, change objects, then we'll validate those changes and deploy those changes to our account, and then we repeat the cycle. Within each of these lifecycle events is a set of actions that we need to take. And we perform those actions by running SDF operations in the command line. Just like we saw in the previous lesson when we created our project with the project create command. SDF doesn't organize its operations into these lifecycle structures though. As we saw previously, SDF organizes its operations by namespaces, so that's how we'll explore them now, for the most part. A fair warning for you, this will be dense. We are about to go through a lot of operations and options. I encourage you to take your time, pause the video, run these commands yourself in multiple variations, play around with the options, experiment, read the supporting documentations as you go through this. You won't memorize or retain all of this information after watching this video once, and that's okay. This is a whole new skill set that is meant to be studied and practiced and learned over time. The commands in the project namespace provide the core functionality of SDF, and they are by far the ones that I use the most in my day-to-day tasks. Back in our terminal now, we are working in the GitHub repository for the course. Link is below. And let's look at the commands in the project namespace by running our trusty help command. We can see the project namespace has 5 commands: add dependencies, create, deploy, package, and validate. Unsurprisingly, the create command is generally the starting point for a new project. Recall that we created our current project using the interactive mode of this command. So let's look at the other options. If you scan through these options, you'll see essentially the same information that we provided during interactive mode. This is effectively how interactive mode always works. It prompts you for the options that you could alternatively provide directly on the command line. We can directly specify the project's type and name in the command. The ID, version, and publisher ID can also be provided, although those are only relevant for Suite apps. Additionally, there is an overwrite switch that we can use to completely replace an existing project with an empty project of the same name. Without this switch, if the create command finds a directory with the same name as the project, it will throw an error and stop the project creation. Generally, when creating my projects, I find myself sticking to interactive mode. It is simple and it allows me to automatically add the unit testing framework to all of my projects as well. There's no way to do that from the command line yet. The rest of the commands in the project namespace are not very useful or interesting without some actual content in our project. So we're going to go through the rest of the namespaces first to populate our project, and then we'll sprinkle in these project commands where they become a little more relevant. Now, since we have an SDF project already established, it now needs to be able to connect to our NetSuite accounts in order to do its job. The commands in the account namespace enable us to do just that. An SDF project can authenticate to a NetSuite account using either a username and password or using a token. Token-based authentication is my preferred and recommended approach, so that's what we're going to use in the course. To get started, you'll need to create a new token for the user and role that you'll be using. In case you're not familiar with that process, you can find instructions in the help documentation. There'll be a link down below to take you there. I do recommend that you avoid using the administrator role for your token, at least for your stable SDF operations. It's okay while you're learning and testing, but once you have the basics down, I recommend using the standard developer role or a customized version of that. NetSuite designed that standard role with SDF in mind, so it is an excellent starting point. Once you've created your token, keep that token ID and token secret handy because you will need to provide them to SDF shortly. Back in our terminal once again, let's run SweetCloud help and inspect the commands of the account namespace. The account namespace has 3 commands in it: manage auth, save token, and setup. Setup will configure a new token and account for use. Save token will add or update one of your local tokens. And manage auth will let you list, rename, or remove your existing authentication configurations. Right now, we want to set up authentication with a new account, so the setup command is what we want. Let's run that command with the help switch to inspect its available options. As we can see, the only unique option here to specify is -D to specify a domain. We can safely ignore that option as we're almost always going to want to run this command in interactive mode using -I. When we do so, SDF will list our current configurations or let us create a new one. When we create a new one, the first prompt that we receive is which authentication method we're going to use. And like I said, we'll select token-based authentication. The second prompt is for an authentication ID. This is not your token ID. The authentication ID is an alias for this one specific account token pairing. The alias can be whatever string you would like, as it is strictly for your use. So you want to make it a name that you can immediately recognize which account and token you're using. This ID is not stored with the project, or it's not shared in any way. It is local to your machine. You can have multiple authentication IDs stored on your machine. One example of that might be if you have a production account and a sandbox account and a dev account, you'll have separate authentication IDs for each account. After you choose an authentication ID, you need to provide your account ID. You can typically find this pretty easily in the URL of your NetSuite UI. The subdomain in the URL will contain your account ID. For sandboxes, there will be a -SB and then a number. But for the account ID in SDF, you'll replace the hyphen with an underscore, and you will capitalize the SB. Everything else should look the same. Finally, you'll be prompted for the token ID and the token secret for the token you just generated. If everything was configured correctly, the command will succeed. I'm going to skip out of it. I've already set up this Salto account. If any of your account ID or your token ID or your secret were invalid, an error message will be displayed telling you so much. You'll need to run account setup again to ensure that you enter all of those details correctly. If you'll be working with multiple accounts, perhaps multiple clients or sandbox production, you can repeat the same command again and again to set up each of your additional accounts or tokens. And while you have multiple accounts set up, you can run account setup or account manage auth with no options to show the list of accounts and select or switch the active account for the project. Here's the list of my active configurations. I want to make sure I'm using the Salto dev account. And so I am. Now, if you were really paying attention, you probably noticed there's a save token command. We can alternatively use that to add or overwrite a saved token in just one line rather than using that full interactive mode. Save token does effectively the same thing as setup, except that we provide each of the data points as parameters to the command instead of being prompted for them by SDF. So once again, as always, let's check the help output for the command. Here we see the options for each of the data points we entered during our setup command. Rather than entering them at a prompt, we pass them all as options. It would look something just like this, and that would overwrite or add a new auth ID with token for you. Since NetSuite's conversion to account-based domains, I have not found the URL option to do anything, so you can safely ignore that when you're using save token. For myself, I find the setup command easier to use manually because I don't have to remember the option names or the formats. And then I use the save token command in a scripted context, like perhaps a utility script I've written locally or in a continuous integration environment like CircleCI. Lastly, the manage auth command will let us display, rename, and remove our existing auth IDs. As always, help first. Here we see the options for manage auth. The list option will list all of our current auth IDs. The info option allows us to show more details about a particular auth ID. Then we can use rename and rename to in conjunction to rename an existing auth ID. Running manage auth with no options yields an error. And manage auth, as usual, supports interactive mode to prompt you for these inputs instead. Now that we've connected our project to a NetSuite account, we're ready to put SDF to use. And to do that, we need to put some custom objects in our project. Custom objects in SDF are represented by XML files. And there are a few ways we can get those XML files into our project. We could create them directly by hand. We can manually download the XML for an existing object from the UI and then place that file into our project. Or we can use SDF commands in the object namespace to automatically import the definitions of existing objects into the project. We won't go into creating the XML files manually here, but you can find all of the schemas for doing so in NetSuite's help documentation. If you want to download the XML file for an object from the NetSuite UI, you can do so from the object's definition page. Here we have the definition page for a custom list. If I want to download the XML, I can make sure the page is in edit mode first, and then I simply hover over Actions and click Download XML. That will download the file to my local hard drive. And from there, I can relocate it into the objects directory of my SDF project. And here is the XML for our custom list. Now, downloading files from the UI works well for single objects, but it gets quite tedious if you need to add many objects to your project. Unfortunately, with SDF, the commands in the object namespace, we have much better means of incorporating objects into our project. The object namespace has 3 commands in it: import, list, and update. Let's first take a look at the list command, as we can use this to show us the IDs for any custom objects which already exist in our account. As usual, Object List supports an interactive mode, and then it provides a few options for generating and filtering the list of custom objects. Running Object List with no options will list the type and ID of every object in the account. You can use the App ID option to specify only the objects from a specific Suite app. When App ID is not specified, only objects that are not from a Suite app are shown. The resulting list will show each customization in the same format: the type of the object followed by a colon and then the script ID of the object. We can then provide these values to the type and script ID options, respectively. Generally, when we're using this command, we're looking for a specific type of customization, and we can use the type option to filter the list accordingly. If we scroll through our list of objects, we can see that custom records are defined by the type custom record type. So that's the value we would use for the type option. And now our list is filtered accordingly to only show custom record types. We can further refine the list using the script ID option, which acts as a sort of fuzzy search operator. So if I want to see only custom records where the ID contains the letters SLT, I can use the script ID option to do so. And now we see only the matching record type. One thing to watch out for when using script ID to search like this is that an underscore character acts as a wildcard for a single character. So it's fairly common to use underscores in your custom IDs. So if you provide underscores as part of your script ID filter, you might get a few matches that you're not expecting. So just be aware of that. This behaves the same for lots of other commands that provide searching and filtering. So just understand that underscore is the wildcard character in these search interfaces. In practice, I don't find myself using object list very often, but it does provide a handy way to search and retrieve or confirm script IDs without having to log into the NetSuite UI. Now that we have a way to obtain types and IDs for our customizations, we can import the objects that we want to manage with SDF to our project using the object import operation. As always, start with the help. And don't forget SuiteCloud. Among other options, we support interactive mode here. Interactive mode is a generally useful way to learn the behavior of a lot of these commands. As you'll see, this command behaves very similarly to the object list command. First, we're prompted with a choice to import all object types. And we'll generally want to answer no for this, as we're usually searching for a specific customization to import. If you answer yes, though, for science, SDF will prompt you for a search filter, which behaves similarly to what we just saw. But if you don't provide any search filter here, you'll get a list of every custom object in the account, which is probably not very useful at all. So let's rerun the command answering no instead. Now we're prompted with the list of customization types, with the controls explained to us above the list: space to select, A to toggle everything, I to invert everything, and enter to select or proceed. You can scroll through this list and see the huge amount of customization types that SDF supports. I know that I want to import a custom list and a client script, so I will mark both of those. List, script, client, enter. I'll add a filter of SDF. And here are my list and my script. When we import a script, it will ask us whether we want to import the associated source file as well. If you say no, the source file will then need to be included as a dependency in your manifest.xml. I can't think of a time where I've answered no to this. I don't know why I would want the script record, but not its source file. So let's say yes. We're then prompted with a list of folders where we'd like the XML stored. If you have any subdirectories under your objects folder, they'll be listed as choices here. We haven't added any subdirectories under our objects folder, so objects is our only choice. Lastly, there's a warning that running this command will overwrite any local objects or files with the same name as those you're importing. We don't have any, we know they're not there, so let's let that happen. SDF now goes out to the account, retrieves the objects we requested. It shows us a list of everything it imported. And interestingly, at the bottom, it shows us the corresponding command line version of what we just did. That's another useful way that interactive mode kind of helps you learn these commands. We should now be able to hop into our objects directory and see these new files. Here's our client script. I imported the same lessons custom list that we already had. Now that we have objects in our project, we may need to update them from time to time if they are changed in the UI. Perhaps an administrator adds some new options to a custom list or changes the permissions on a custom record. We need to pull those changes down into our project so that we don't overwrite them on our next deploy. And we do that using the object update command. Let's clear the screen. Do that again. Object update supports interactive mode, which is going to provide us another searching interface, very similar to the other object commands. We'll shake it up this time and skip interactive mode, as we only need to provide the script ID option with the custom IDs of the objects we want to update. Let's say I want to update that custom list. We can grab its internal ID from the XML and provide that in the script ID option. Once this completes, the object definition will be pulled down from the account and updated in our project. Again, note that this will blindly and silently overwrite any local changes you may have made to those objects. So be very careful when running this update command that you don't lose any of your own changes. We will talk a lot more about this problem throughout the course because it's kind of a big deal. The other interesting option to note in Object Update is Include Instances. When we're updating a custom record type specifically, in our project, SDF can additionally store some of those instances for that custom record in the XML definition. I've already done this with this custom segment. And we can see in the XML, it adds this instances section and brings in the specific instances of the record. This can be used to transfer instances of a custom record from one account to another, say production to sandbox, because when we deploy custom record types with their instances, those instances get created or updated in the target account. But this is very limited data transfer. SDF only supports storing 100 instances of any single record type, and it does not support storing instances of native records in any way. Despite the fact that this option exists, I don't recommend you look at SDF as a viable data import or data transfer tool. That is not what it's designed for. CSV imports are infinitely better at this job. Now, I hope at this point you're starting to see a pattern. When I go to run a command, I almost always use its help option, first to reacquaint myself with the command. If I want SDF to walk me through the operation, I use interactive mode. If I then need more help or more information on how an operation works, the next place to go is to NetSuite Help. Every command and option is documented there in much more detail. As you're going through the course and learning SDF, I highly recommend you include the help documentation for SDF in your studies and your practice. There are some links below to some really informative and important pages to get you started. Now that we have some objects in our project, it's time to pull in an important command from the project namespace: add dependencies. One of the really powerful features of SDF is its dependency management and validation. Many customization objects are tightly coupled together. A custom record might have a list field on it linked to a custom list. A script might have a parameter on it linked to a custom record type. Those custom objects are now dependent on each other. They won't function correctly if any of their dependencies are missing in the target account. During validation and deployment, SDF will first check that the target account meets all the required dependencies before proceeding with a deployment. Dependencies are specified in manifest.xml. If we look at manifest.xml right now, it's not very interesting. It contains only a few fields of metadata about our SDF project. That's where add dependencies comes in. It's very straightforward. It has no options besides a help option. When we run this command, SDF will look through the XML objects defined in our project and determine what dependencies are missing from the manifest, and then automatically add those. So let's run it and see what happens. So the command scanned our object definitions and automatically identified missing dependencies. In this case, it found several feature dependencies, both required and optional, and it found an object dependency as well. Because we have a script object in our project, the server-side scripting feature becomes required. If that feature were disabled in a target account, SDF would detect that upon validation or deployment, and it would fail with a message. Taking a look at our manifest now, we see the required and optional dependencies have all been added here. Dependencies can be features, they can be other objects, they can be files that must exist in the file cabinet. SDF will process them all and validate them all, making sure they exist so that your deployments don't fail. Note that this command does not crawl your source code to look for references there. It's not quite sophisticated enough to know how to look for custom IDs within your code, so adding dependencies which are only referenced in your source code is completely up to you to add those manually in your manifest. Your deployments won't fail, but your code will if those dependencies don't exist. By adding them to the manifest, your dependency, or rather your project, your deployment will fail if that dependency does not exist. You want to run the add dependencies operation anytime that you add new object definitions to your project and before you deploy to ensure that your manifest is always up to date.